Everything I owned that mattered fit into one suitcase and a manila envelope, and I remember thinking, the night before I left for Halifax, that 28 years old was a strange age to feel like you were finally being born. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened, but I'll tell you anyway, because she'd want me to say it plainly. I'm Ellery. Ellery Whitcomb. I'd spent 4 years working 2 jobs to put myself through a paralegal certificate at Mohawk College, and the week before everything fell apart, I'd finally landed the offer. A position at a firm in Halifax, real money, benefits, a chance to stop living in my childhood bedroom in Hamilton with the same water stain on the ceiling I'd been staring at since I was 9. I'd saved $11,000. Not from anything glamorous. I drove for a rideshare app on weekends, picked up shifts at a call center during the week, skipped vacations, skipped new winter boots 2 years running, ate the same 6 meals on rotation because they were cheap and filling. Every dollar went into a separate account my mother didn't know the password to. I thought that mattered. I thought a locked account meant something was finally mine. The flight was booked for a Tuesday morning. My new apartment in Halifax was already secured, first and last month's rent wired through, the lease signed and scanned back. I had a job that started the following Monday. I had, for the first time in my adult life, a plan that didn't depend on anyone's permission. The night before, I laid everything out on my bed like I was performing a ritual. Passport. Boarding pass printed in case the app failed. The signed lease. My certificate, the one with my name embossed in gold lettering. The only piece of paper I owned that proved I'd built something with my own 2 hands. I went through that pile 3 times. I set my alarm for 5. I lay down and let myself feel something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Quiet, fragile, terrifying hope. I woke up to the bedroom light snapping on at 1:15 in the morning. My mother stood in the doorway in her housecoat, and my passport was already in her hand. She held it the way you'd hold a flyer you were about to recycle. Casual. Final. I sat up too fast, my heart slamming, and asked her what she was doing, even though some part of me already understood. She told me I wasn't getting on that plane. Not shouted, not negotiated. Stated the way you'd state the weather. You're not going anywhere, Ellery. Who's going to take care of your father? My father was 61, retired early on a decent pension, perfectly capable of making his own toast, and driving himself to his cardiologist appointments, which he'd been doing without incident for 2 years. But in my mother's mouth, in that moment, I understood I had never once been her daughter in the way I'd imagined. I was staff. Unpaid, indefinite, expected staff. My older brother appeared behind her in the hallway in his boxers, arms crossed, looking faintly amused, like this was a sitcom he was watching, and not a life he had any obligation toward. He said our mother was right, that Dad's been off lately, that it wouldn't kill me to wait a year. He has never once waited a year for anything in his life. He moved to Toronto at 22 with nothing but a duffel bag and our parents' blessing. No questions asked. I begged. I want to say I held on to some dignity, but I didn't. I sat on the edge of my bed in my pajamas at 1 in the morning, and I pleaded with my own mother, told her about the $11,000, the lease, the job that started in 6 days, told her this wasn't a whim. This was 4 years of my life condensed into one chance. She told me to lower my voice before I woke the neighbors. My brother told me I was being dramatic. They left with my passport, and I heard the lock of their bedroom door click shut down the hall, final as a verdict. I missed my flight. I sat on the kitchen floor at 6 in the morning, still in the clothes I'd slept in, watching the departure time tick past on my phone, then the boarding time, then the gate closing. I didn't call the airline. I didn't call anyone. I went upstairs and I lay on my bed, and I didn't move for the better part of 3 days. It wasn't pretty crying, the kind you see in movies. It was the kind that leaves your eyes swollen shut and your throat raw, the kind where you forget for half a second when you first wake up, and then it crashes back down on you, like the ceiling caving in. On the 3rd day, my mother knocked on my door to tell me dinner was ready, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't ended something I'd spent 4 years building. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror before I went downstairs and didn't recognize the person staring back. Hollow, defeated, shrinking into herself. And something in me just said, no, not like this. I washed my face. I put on real clothes for the first time in 3 days. And I made a decision that would end up changing everything, though I had no way of knowing that yet. I went to Passport Canada, not to make a scene. Not even sure, honestly, what I expected, maybe just to understand whether what had happened to me was something I had to accept, or whether there was a door somewhere I hadn't found yet. I took 2 buses to get downtown, which felt enormous after 3 days of barely leaving my bed. The office was fluorescent lit and smelled like burnt coffee, full of people staring at their phones waiting for numbers to be called. I took mine, sat down, and waited an hour and 10 minutes. When my number finally came up, I stepped to the counter and explained, as calmly as I could manage, what had happened. The flight, the $11,000. The lease in Halifax, my parents taking my passport in the middle of the night. I expected sympathy and nothing more. What I got instead made my hands go cold. The woman behind the counter, her name tag said Priscilla, though I'd later learn everyone there called her by her last name, looked at me with this steady, unhurried patience, like she'd seen this exact look on someone's face before and knew exactly what came next. She told me that a Canadian passport issued to an adult is the property of the government of Canada, held in trust for that individual, and that no parent, no spouse, no family member of any kind has any legal authority over it. None. She said that what my mother had done, taking it, withholding it, using it as leverage, could be reported, and that there were real, documented channels for exactly this kind of situation. She slid an emergency replacement form across the counter, explained the process for reporting a passport as withheld rather than lost, and gave me a card for victim services, a free program through the province that handled cases of coercive control within families. She said the words coercive control like they were a fact of law, not an accusation, and something about hearing it stated so plainly cracked something open in me. I filled out every line of that form with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. She told me the replacement would take 5 to 7 business days given the circumstances I'd documented, possibly faster given my flight had already been missed, and I had proof of employment and lease obligations in another province. I called Halifax the next morning, terrified my job offer would simply evaporate. The HR coordinator, a woman named Brielle, no, I'm getting ahead of myself, that's not her name, doesn't matter, was kind about it in a way I wasn't prepared for, said family emergencies happened, said they could push my start date 2 weeks if I needed it. The relief of that phone call nearly put me on the floor. Victim services called the following afternoon. A counselor there, calm-voiced, methodical, walked me through what coercive control actually meant under the criminal code, explained that withholding someone's identification documents to prevent them from leaving could, depending on circumstances, constitute a form of unlawful confinement or coercion, and that while criminal charges in family situations were complicated and often not pursued, a documented complaint mattered, created a record, and that I had every right to pursue a civil request for return of property regardless. She helped me draft a formal letter. Cold, factual, no pleading in it at all, demanding the return of my passport and personal documents within 5 business days, citing the legal provisions, copying Passport Canada's case reference number, stating plainly that continued withholding would be reported and pursued as theft of federal property. I left that letter on the kitchen table on a Thursday morning before either of them was awake, and I went and sat in a coffee shop for 4 hours because I couldn't be in the house when they read it. When I came home that evening, the house was silent in a way I'd never heard it. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her, and she didn't look up when I walked in. My father was in the living room with the television off, just sitting there, staring at nothing. My brother wasn't even there. He'd gone back to Toronto 2 days earlier without a word to me. Nobody spoke to me that whole evening. I went to my room and I packed quietly, methodically, the way you do something you've rehearsed in your head 100 times. Friday evening, my passport was sitting on my pillow when I came upstairs. No note, no apology. No acknowledgement of the 11 days it had cost me, the deposit I'd nearly lost on the apartment, the 4 years of sacrifice that had been treated like nothing. I rebooked my flight for the following Tuesday. In the time I had left, I opened a new bank account at a different institution, one my mother had never had access to and never would. I changed my address on every document that mattered. I told my younger cousin Marisol, the only person in that family who'd ever treated me like a person instead of a function, what had happened quietly over coffee, and told her if she ever needed to leave that house, too, she could call me from anywhere, any hour, no questions. She hugged me for a long time at the bus stop and didn't say much, and I understood that hug completely. The morning I left for good, I was up before my alarm. I got dressed in the dark, carried my suitcase down the stairs as quietly as I could, and called a cab from the porch instead of waiting inside. I could hear my parents moving around upstairs. Neither of them came down. No goodbye. No last attempt to stop me. No apology waiting at the door. Just silence. The same silence that had filled that house for as long as I could remember. The silence I had spent 28 years mistaking for a quieter kind of love. Standing there on the porch with my hand on the handle of my suitcase, I understood finally that it had never been love expressed badly. It had simply been the absence of it, and I'd spent my whole life filling that absence in with excuses on their behalf. I didn't look back at the house. The cab pulled away, and I watched it get smaller in the side mirror, and felt nothing but a kind of clean, cold relief. At the airport, I moved through check-in and security without incident, my passport finally back in my own hand, the way it should have been all along. I was nearly at my gate when a Canada Border Services officer near the boarding area glanced at the photo page, looked up at me, and paused. My stomach dropped instantly. After everything, my first thought was that something else had gone wrong, that there was some flag on my file, some final obstacle. But she looked at me for another second and then said she recognized me. She'd been the officer at the pre-clearance kiosk weeks earlier, the day I'd done my original check-in, before I ever knew I wouldn't make that flight. She said she remembered my name because it was unusual, and that she'd actually wondered, briefly, what had happened to the woman who never showed up for her flight that morning. I told her, standing right there in the boarding line with people shuffling past us, the short version of what had happened. She listened without interrupting, the way Sandra at Victim Services had, the way Priscilla at the passport office had, strangers who'd given me more grace in a week than my own family had in a decade. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stamped my passport, slid it back across, and said, "Have a good flight home then. Sounds like you're due." Home. Not the house I'd grown up in. Halifax, a city I'd never set foot in, that I was about to make mine. I've been here 3 years now. I made supervisor at the firm last spring. I bought a small condo near the harbor with a view of the water that I still can't quite believe is mine. I built a life out of people who chose me back. A roommate who became a sister in every way that counts. A partner who has never once made me feel like a convenience. A small, fierce circle of friends who know my whole story and stayed anyway. My parents and I haven't spoken since that morning on the porch. My mother sent one email 8 months in that opened with an apology and ended with a request for money. I didn't answer it. My cousin Marisol still calls me every few weeks, and last winter she finally left that house herself, 20 years old and terrified and free, and I was the one who picked her up from the bus station in the snow. I saved for 4 years to build a life of my own. My mother took my passport to stop me, and I left anyway, and I have never once looked back and wished I hadn't.